The world looks to California to answer the hard questions, for redemption, to introduce the unfamiliar, to be resilient. Because California bounces back, holds us accountable, values who we are, remains vigilant, defies those in our way, and stands for community. Here on the West Coast, we're at the center of it all. Los Angeles Times, the state of what's next.
Hey, Malcolm, you know that Audible's got a lot more than audiobooks?
Of course, podcasts,
Originals,
bestsellers,
future bestsellers,
sleep stories.
sleep story. What are you talking about, sleep story? Malcolm. Oh, wow. Malcolm. Malcolm. Hey, no, Roxy. Hey, Roxy, get out of Malcolm's house.
The most inspiring minds, the most compelling stories, all in one place. Audible.
Hello, I'm Matt Brennan, television editor of the Los Angeles Times. Thank you all for tuning in to the 26th Annual Festival of Books. I'll be your host for today's virtual event with Jesse Tyler Ferguson, award-winning actor with a passion for cooking and entertaining, best known for his role in the TV series Modern Family, and co-author of Food Between Friends. With best friend and co-author Julie Tanous, they pay homage to their hometowns as they whip up modern California food with Southern and Southwestern spins in their debut cookbook. Before we get started, I want to remind everyone to support your local independent bookstore during the festival. Jesse has signed copies of Food Between Friends, and they're available through Pages, a bookstore. Jesse, welcome.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. Good to see you, Matt.
Of course, good to see you too. I have to say, I spent the past week cooking exclusively out of the book. And the chermoula roasted broccolini with tahini dressing is like my new obsession. I might eat it 3 times this week.
It's one of the recipes that's in high rotation at our place. My husband, Justin, is constantly requesting that. And I've now started roasting other things with that sauce. It's a very versatile recipe. So I'm glad you like it.
It's really great. And I've loved everything that I've cooked out of the book. I would love to sort of start things off. You know, in the introduction, you tell this really great story about how you and Julie got together and how sort of you became friends. I'm wondering if you could share a little bit of that with viewers and then talk about sort of how being friends and then translated into your food blog, Food Between Friends.
Right. So Julie and I met at a dinner party that my friend was throwing called the Spring Street Social Society, which is a fantastic kind of roaming interactive dinner party in different areas of the United States. And they were doing one in Los Angeles. So Julie and I were both invited to go to that. And Julie had just actually given birth to her first daughter, Josephine, and was suffering from a bit of postpartum depression. So she was having a hard time getting out of the house, and her husband really encouraged her to just go to this dinner party. It was way downtown. She lives in the Pacific Palisades, and anyone who knows Los Angeles knows that that is like an hour-and-a-half drive with no traffic. And so she ended up going, and the only seat that was still available was at the end of the table next to me. I was sitting next to my husband and he was sitting across from his best friend, Todd. And so the chair across from me was empty, and she was like, oh gosh. And I guess she told me this later, but she goes, oh God, now I have to go sit next to the celebrity. Like my anxiety is already not high enough. So she sits down, and the first thing she says, and remember that the name of the dinner party was called the Spring Street Social Society. And she says, my name's Julie and I'm having Spring Street social anxiety right now. And I was like, okay, you're hilarious. And we ended up having a really fantastic time together. And one of the things, you know, we asked, you know, what do you do? And what do you do? It was like a first date. And when she asked me like what I did for a living, I was like, oh, she doesn't know that I'm an actor on television. This is fantastic. Like she actually wants to get to know me because she just finds me interesting. So I was asking her what she did for a living. She told me that she went to culinary school and she was a recipe developer. And, you know, she told me all about just having her first kid. And we just had a really, really fun time together. And we talked about our passion for cooking. I talked about how I'd always wanted to go to culinary school, but never had the opportunity or time. And we basically exchanged numbers and said, let's cook together. And I told Julie, I was like, I'm gonna ask you to come over and teach me some of your culinary skills, because there are so many things I'm desperate to learn, you know, simple knife skills and how to spatchcock a chicken. I wanted to use her as basically my personal culinary tutor. And so she came over and we started developing recipes together, just sort of for ourselves. And it was like a year or two later that she actually admitted to me that she fully knew who I was. And she was just playing it cool. And I thought it was just very charming that she wanted to put me at ease as much as I wanted to put her at ease. So.
Was there a moment that you remember where the two of you sort of had the light bulb go off of this should be a blog, this should be a cookbook, I want to share this with people beyond our own kind of social circle?
Yeah, well, it's funny because Julie pitched me an idea for a cookbook idea that she had in the back of her brain, for the past few years. It was, and that's not the concept we ended up going with. But at the time, I was like, this is fantastic. Like, let's take this to my agents. So I took them to my agents at ICM. I met with the book editor, the book agent there, and she was like, "How long have you guys known each other?" I was like, 3 weeks, and she's got this great idea. And my agent was like, "Okay, calm down. Why don't you guys get to know each other and like just cook in the kitchen and sort of see what naturally develops?" And so we were like, "Okay," and we started just creating recipes together and posting them on Instagram. And people would ask us, like, "What's the recipe for this? This looks amazing." So we decided to create a blog. The title of our blog originally was called, get ready for it, I know this is going to blow your mind, but it was called Julie and Jesse Cook. Don't ask me how I came up with that title. It was a stroke of genius. I haven't been able to top myself since then. But we had this blog and we just put all of our recipes there. And some of them are, some of our first recipes, I'm a little like, I'm not ashamed of them, but also I'm like, ooh, we certainly got better with time. Because also I feel like cooking with someone in the kitchen and cooking with a friend specifically, it's like, it really is like a dating process, and you get to know one another and you get to know each other's quirks and like what stresses one out, and what your skills are and what your strengths are, and how you can sort of collaborate with one another. So it was definitely a process, and through that whole like early phase of our creating our blog, we were just figuring out what our relationship was. And as we kept creating together, the recipes just got more and more interesting, and we started pulling in inspirations from our backgrounds and our histories. And Julie's from Alabama, I'm from New Mexico, so we started pulling in things from our home states and creating with those ingredients that we love so much. And finally, we'd always still had this idea of maybe doing a cookbook, but it was actually the editors of Clarkson Potter, I have a prop, who came to us and said, "We would love to turn your blog into a cookbook." And so I feel like their confidence in us was all we needed to hear, because initially when I pitched the idea of doing a book with them, my agent was like, "Whoa, hold up, get to know one another." So it was nice that an actual like fancy publishing house came to us and said, "We think this could really be something."
That's so fun. I'm curious, since you brought it up. Do you have a kitchen quirk that you feel like Julie like really needed to get used to, or that you were like trying to downplay during the getting to know you process? You know how like when you go on a first date and you're like, "I'm not going to share the weirdest thing about me just yet." Do you have like a kitchen version of that?
Yeah, I think I do. I'm an impulsive cleaner, and that came from me being not a good cleaner in the kitchen. Like I would finish making just like a simple pie crust, and there'd be like flour on the ceiling. Like, I used to be really bad. So like I've gotten very kind of laser focused on like keeping things clean. And I was like, I have to like not be quite so micromanaging, I guess. Like it'd be, I'd be like kind of looking over her shoulder to like see if like she's spilling some flour, and then I'd be there with a rag immediately wiping it up. I was like, "Okay, Jesse, calm down. The kitchen will be clean later. Just rein it in." And for Julie, I feel, I don't know what her quirks are. I do know that I don't cook with as much butter and sugar as Julie does. Julie's a true Southerner, and if you turn your back on her for 3 seconds, she's going to add some butter to something you're making. And so I feel like for her, she had to learn to sort of pump those brakes a little bit. Not to say that the cookbook does not have plenty of butter and sugar, but it was something that I would always ask, like, do we really need that? Do we need that much? Do we need it at all? So, but also our very first recipe that we made together was a roasted chicken, and you would normally, rub tons of butter all over the bird so it gets that really brown, beautiful skin. And I was like, let's try and make it a little healthier. And my husband and I were eating paleo at the time, so we rubbed the skin with ghee, which is just clarified butter, basically butter with the milk solids taken out, which makes it paleo and healthier. But it doesn't brown the chicken as beautifully as butter would, because you really need those milk solids to brown the skin. And whereas the chicken tasted great, it looked like it was raw. So, I mean, there is something to be said for, using the techniques that have been around for hundreds and hundreds of years. And Julie certainly is a master at like knowing what to do in the kitchen. And I just sort of learned from her.
Was it intimidating for you to work on a cookbook as someone who, as you say, kind of came to your friendship with Julie and the blog and then the book without a lot of formal training? Or by the time you got to the actual cookbook process, did you feel confident enough?
Yeah, I'm so curious. I wonder how many first-time authors, because Julie and I are both first-time authors. I truly wonder how many first-time authors have imposter syndrome, because I certainly had it. And, also being someone who just admires people in the culinary world so much, I didn't want to come in and sort of, present myself as someone who had this rich history with food and creating recipes. Like I'm a new home cook, and I love doing it. I think I'm really good at it, and I'm a sponge, and I love to learn. But I'm a home cook. I'm not gonna like compare what I do with like some of the greatest chefs in the world. I also like hosted I don't know why I said like. I actually hosted the James Beard Awards 2 years for not 2 years in a row, but I hosted for 2 years. And I was just, the James Beard Awards, for those who don't know, are basically the Oscars of the culinary world. And I had such pressure to, be in this room with all of these people I admired so greatly. And yet I felt like I was part of that community, but at the same time, sort of an outsider. And I was like, I just want to make them laugh, and I want them to have an amazing night. I want this night to be really special for them. This is their big evening. Like in the culinary world, the James Beard Awards was like the big night. And I felt that the same sort of pressure when we were, creating the book. I felt like there's gonna be a lot of eyes on this book from people who are both chefs and non-chefs, and experienced cooks and non-experienced cooks. And I just didn't want to disappoint anyone. Like, I have a great desire to be liked and to be, to succeed. I'm working on all these things with my therapist, but it is, it's something that I'm still, I don't think I'll ever have that feeling of like, should I actually be in this room? And I feel that way about my acting career too. I sometimes, when I was at the Emmy Awards, I was like, Bryan Cranston's here. I don't think I should be nominated. It's just the burden I have to carry.
I think that's actually a relatively common feeling for avid home cooks, because cooking is so much a part of culture now, but with, food shows, food competition shows, celebrity chefs. But like, then you watch an episode of Top Chef and you have this moment of like, oh, that's a whole different level from my being an ambitious home cook.
Right. I was watching an episode of Top Chef. I'm watching the new season, and there's like liquid nitrogen flowing, and I'm like, oh, I would never. Like, I could never. Like, I thought I was good, and now I feel like I could never do that. But this is also something I really relate to. And when people were buying our book, Food Between Friends, which is available now, and they were posting on Instagram, a lot of people were saying, I'm not a good cook, but I'm going to try this, and like hopefully it'll teach me to be a better cook. There's such a fear of messing up and ruining something and putting all this time and effort and money into something that might not turn out. But that's the beauty of like really well done cookbooks. And I feel like ours definitely is one of those books that is really well done. It's been, all these recipes have been tested. And if you just follow the recipes and you sort of read through everything first and you get all your ingredients in place, there's really very few ways you can mess up. It's really not that hard. And that's what I love about people who, when they create that first successful dish and they're so excited by it. It's really exciting.
The recipes are very approachable. And one of the things that I would be interested to hear your kind of process of how you came up with it is, one of the things that makes it so approachable is the conceit where most of the recipes are broken down as either a Jesse recipe or a Julie recipe. And I'm wondering sort of how you decided that would be the right structure. And also I'd love to talk about how you think kind of your Southwestern influences and her Southern influences blend together coherently.
Right. Well, I mean, just to answer your second question first, I think that, we have such passion for these places that we were raised. I was raised in New Mexico and Julie in Alabama. And we realized as we were making some of the, even just talking about some of the dishes that we loved eating growing up, how compatible they were and how it was so easy to make like hybrid versions of these recipes. Her sweetbread recipe goes great with my green chilies. So it's like, um, the pot pies she loved eating go great as like a chicken enchilada pot pie. The macaroni and cheese her recipe that she absolutely adores goes great with some of the Southwestern flavors that I love. So like we really were excited by how compatible and I wouldn't say interchangeable, but how compatible the ingredients are that we grew up loving. And also just the excitement for me learning about things that she loved that I didn't know about, like sorghum syrup, which we have a lot of in the book, which can also be, you can use, molasses in a pinch, but it really made me fall in love with this ingredient that I didn't know a lot about. And I love cooking with it now. And as far as like writing from two different perspectives, that was, when we first talked about writing this cookbook together, it was always my plan. I was like, I don't want you to be like a ghostwriter, like in the background. Like this is a collaboration between the two of us. This is your book just as much as it is mine. And it's about our friendship. And like, you will be on the cover with me, which she is. So glad I brought this prop out. I was just so excited to tell two different perspectives of someone who, has gone to culinary school with someone who is new to cooking at home, but also just these two histories that we have. And so when we were trying to figure out like, what's the voice of this book, we tried several different ideas and we did like little sample writings of like, what if it's all told from my point of view? Or what if it's told from like a third person? We felt like these stories that the head notes, which are the little paragraphs that sort of introduce each recipe, felt so personal and so, they couldn't be told from a third party. Like it had to be our voices. So I said, we have to figure out a way to create this cookbook where we're each telling our own stories, and sometimes we'll tell stories together. And it was tricky. I think our editor was very nervous about that. And I submitted a lot of samples of like, this is what it would sound like if it was this thing. This is what it would sound like if it was this thing. Here's an example of a head note in Julie's voice. Here's an example of one of my voice. And we sort of had to pitch and sell this idea to create a cookbook from two different people's perspectives. And there's no gimmick behind it. I feel like the humor and the prose of the book, like, you don't get whiplash turning the pages, like all of a sudden, like, okay, who's writing this book now? It feels very fluid, which I'm really, really proud of. And a lot of that's just because we shared our writing with one another and we gave notes to each other on the writing. And, writing is a very personal thing. So, handing over, I'm used to doing that. I've written several essays and done, short stories. And Julie, she's like, I've never shared my writing with someone. So, also gaining her trust to share her writing with me so that I could give her ideas or help her edit her thoughts. And it was a very collaborative process, but it was a lot of fun. I mean, and I'm really proud of the way it turned out with the two voices.
I mean, the vibe that it creates is this really fun, like right from the introduction, it feels like sitting at the table with both of you and you're sort of like telling the same story by like handing off the baton at different moments. And I feel like that is kind of the way the recipes are structured, is they sort of hand off the baton as you go through each section, so that while there's always kind of one voice in a moment, the two are constantly in dialogue with each other in like in a fun kind of casual way.
Absolutely, Matt. I mean, I'm so glad you think that. It's also fun to talk about each other. Like I have a lot of anecdotes about Julie in my head notes, or like there's, for example, there's a chocolate cake that Julie developed that's delicious, but I'll just say it, she struggled with the frosting. I think she had thought it was going to be an easy thing and it wasn't an easy thing. And I think she made 18 or 19 different versions of this frosting. And then at one point she was like, should I just change the whole, like at one point the cake turned into like a whole other thing. I was like, no, you want to make a cake, make a cake. Like I was really happy to like coach her through this process. And so when we got to that recipe in the cookbook, there's a little like, I pop in at one point just to be like, here's a little backstory on this frosting. Just, it's lovely. And congratulations, you just get to have one version of it that's wonderful and well tested, but we have 18 more where that one came from. So it's just, fun to sort of pop in and there's, mentions about text messages that we had with one another during the writing process. And like we published some of those exact conversations of text messages that we had as we were creating these recipes together. So we wanted it to feel like a conversation.
On the subject of sort of your kind of Southwestern New Mexican influences, one of the things in the book that I wasn't as familiar with, and I will admit that as not really a home baker, I have been too intimidated to try it myself first, is sopapillas. And I'm wondering if you could talk about what they are, why you love them, and why they're not scary to make, because I want to try them.
First of all, Matt, I completely understand your fear of them because it's something I grew up with, and I was terrified of sopapillas myself. And I just assumed that they were too difficult. I'm a tentative fryer. Like anything that requires frying, I'm like, I don't know. I'd rather not. But Julie is like really talked me through that fear. And she helped me figure out the sopapilla recipe. I basically introduced what they were to her. And so now I'm going to introduce what they are to all of you. Basically, sopapillas are very indigenous to the Southwest. They are puffy pillows of bread that you fry and they puff up. And so they're hollow and airy on the inside. And in New Mexico, they're served, if you go to a New Mexican restaurant in New Mexico, it's almost guaranteed that they will just serve you sopapillas basically as table bread. And it's meant to like sop up the sauce, or at the end of the meal, you can drizzle honey into it and have it as dessert. There's also stuffed sopapillas where they stuff them with savory meats, or you can stuff them with, strawberries and whipped cream. They're extremely versatile, but basically what the sopapilla is almost like a fry bread, but very puffy. And like, it truly looks like a little pillow. And they're delicious. They're warm. They're fantastic. That being said, I was terrified to make them myself because I actually worked at a New Mexican restaurant in Albuquerque called Sadie's that has like some of the best sopapillas I've ever had. I was like, well, I can never do sopapillas as good as them. And whereas I don't have a whole line cook section with professional fryers, like I realized they're very doable at home in just like a Dutch oven with some oil and a candy thermometer to make sure the oil's hot enough. And they're very simple. And it's something that I was really, really excited to put into the book because I have a deep love for this food. So I sort of wrote a love letter to sopapillas, but also to be able to not only introduce the recipe itself to people who've never had them, but also for those of my friends who know what they are and love sopapillas or live in New Mexico, to give them a very easy version that they can make at home that felt really organic and really authentic to who I am. And recipes like that are what really set the tone for the type of recipes we wanted to put in the book. Things that meant something to us that we wanted to extend to others.
That's actually a good segue, but I recognize I asked this question at the risk of introducing a rift into the friendship. But do you have a favorite of Julie's recipes in the book that you just were like, oh my God, I can't wait to make this every week from now until forever?
Honestly, tonight I'm making something that Julie created. It's a sorghum, it's a garlicky sorghum chicken stir fry, and Justin requests it at least once a week, if not more. And that I found it's in heavy rotation. There's also this strawberry pretzel semi-Fredo that when Julie told me about it, she described it as like a strawberry pretzel salad, which I guess is, in the South, people just call like sort of Jell-O mold salads. And I was sort of nervous about it. I was like, I don't know. It had, whipped cream elements. And anyway, I was like, I'm going to try it and I'll let you know the results. it's the most delicious dessert I've ever had. And I want to make it all the time now. It's just like a loaf of delicious, creamy, fruity awesomeness. It's really, really fantastic. I will warn people, it does take like a good 12 hours to firm up. So don't make it for a dinner party that's happening that evening, which was my mistake. I made it for friends who were coming over that night. And I was like, oh, this won't be ready until 9 o'clock tomorrow morning. So I drove it over to them the next day.
I think anyone who's ever thrown a dinner party has had that kind of experience where it's like, well, this dish is not going to be served tonight, but thanks for coming.
That's why it's very important to read the recipes all the way through before starting them.
Well, so that's actually one thing that I wanted to ask you is, are you a fastidious cook? Do you always follow the recipe and read it through in advance and have your mise en place ready? Or when you're at home kind of cooking for your family, do you tend to improvise or wing it more?
It's honestly a little bit of both. I love being prepared. I love following rules. I love recipes. I'm an avid cookbook collector. So if I'm not cooking from my cookbook, then I'm cooking from someone else's. I love getting ideas from other cooks and finding inspiration in chefs and home cooks that I admire. But I also, when I was creating this cookbook, I had to sort of, take off those training wheels. And I was like, oh no, I'm the person who has to like develop interesting recipes. So I have to be okay improvising, and I have to be okay messing up and trying things that aren't going to work and like figuring out how to make them right. Like that's what recipe developing is. Like you really have to just sort of use your palate as the measuring tools. So I've learned to let go a little bit in the kitchen, but I always love a mise en place, especially if I'm like, know what I'm making. And mise en place, for those who don't know, means just getting all your stuff together before starting. We have a little blurb about mise en place in our introduction. And it ensures that you're going to have a successful time in the kitchen, and you're not going to all of a sudden like realize, oh God, I got to chop an onion and the oil's hot and the carrots and the celery's burning and I got to get these onions in and I haven't even done that yet. Just have everything in place. And also I love it because it feels like you're on a cooking show. It feels like you're Rachel Ray or like Martha Stewart or like, Snoop Dogg, and just like putting things into a pan and you're like, you just feel fancy. And also it's called mise en place. So that's always fun too. But I have learned to also let go and just sort of improvise. If I don't have an ingredient, Google's great. Just say like, what do I use in place of sorghum syrup? And they're going to say molasses. And you're like, okay, I have that. And like, it's all going to be okay. The world's not going to crumble if like you change an ingredient or if you leave out the cilantro. One of my friends was writing, she's like, I don't like cilantro. You have too much cilantro in this book. I'm not going to make any of these recipes. I was like, don't use the cilantro. That's fine. They're not cilantro dependent. So yeah, just everyone needs to relax is my, I'm going to have that tattooed on my forehead.
Was there anything?
The name of my second book is Everybody Needs to Relax.
Oh, that's a good one. That could be like that's a good memoir title, maybe.
Yeah, maybe it's better for memoir.
I guess it could be a cookbook title, like home cooking with Jesse. Everyone needs to relax.
Yeah.
Was there anything, when you were going through that process of recipe developing for the first time and really feeling like you kind of had the training wheels off, was there any sort of like dish that you tried that really bombed that actually taught you something important about cooking that you maybe hadn't known before?
I don't know if this taught me anything about cooking, but I have had several recipes that have bombed. Well, no, but I'll tell you two stories. I was always terrible at pie crust. It just was the devil to me. I could never perfect it. I would try 4 or 5 different batches of it, and it would always just fail me miserably. It'd be too sticky, it'd be too dry. Like I would be in tears at the end of it. I actually talk about this in the book. And meeting Julie, I was like, you need to teach me how to make pie crust, because she's an expert baker, and she taught me just a few simple tweaks to something I already knew how to do. And now I can't fail with it. Like it's just something that I know I can do with like my eyes closed. So, failure in the kitchen, I think is always opportunity to learn something. And, just because you failed once doesn't mean you can't get it right the next time. and that's a motto for life as well, as we all know. But so another fail that I didn't learn anything from, other than not to make that dish again, was Julie and I were actually trying to create these sort of shrimp fritters, and it was in the phase when we were trying to create some more paleo or grain-free recipes, and so we used ground up shrimp as a binding agent for these shrimp fritters, and it just didn't work. It was never going to work. We fried them up, and it was like they were like dumplings that had been turned inside out, and that were just sort of like the consistency was wrong. It was just, they were not good. And so we served them to my friend Todd, who is over at our place. This was years ago. I feel like I always have to say, it was not during COVID. We didn't have friends in the house during COVID. It actually was years ago, but it's Justin's best friend, Todd, and he doesn't know anything about cooking. And he took a bite of the shrimp fritter, which they tasted fine, but the consistency was terrible. And he goes, slippery. And I was like, okay, that's not an adjective anyone ever wants to hear about something they've made. So that will never be made again. So I didn't take much from the experience other than no paleo shrimp fritters.
Slippery. That is a good one. Since you raised the subject of the pandemic, it's changed so many people's cooking and eating habits. I know people who, everything from sourdough starters to beer brewing to new gardens to all kinds of things. Is there any way that it's really reshaped your and your family's cooking and eating habits?
Well, I'll never eat banana bread again. A lot of banana bread. I love cooking, but I've never cooked more than I have in this past year. And I think a lot of people can really relate to that. It was very interesting to also be creating a cookbook during that time. We were still recipe developing at the beginning of the pandemic. So a lot of the recipes that are in the book were, products of us having to be creative with ingredients we couldn't really find at that time. But for me, it brought back the importance of just feeding my family. I also became a father I had my first kid this past year. So, whereas I'm not feeding, Beckett slippery, shrimp fritters, I'm excited to watch him eat and discover new flavors. And I'm excited to introduce him to new things. And the one thing I wish it had changed, but it didn't, is Justin is still just as unuseful in the kitchen as before. Like, even when it comes to doing dishes, I'm like, do you know where the dish detergent is? Do you know where the dishwasher is? Let's start there. And the answer is kind of not really.
Is his style like he just comes in when dinner is served, or does he provide moral support while you're cooking?
Yeah, it's like when Justin gets hangry, and we all can relate to this, he's just fussy. And even before we had Beckett, I would just hand him a phone. I'd be like, here, do a TikTok about this or something. It was like giving a baby a rattle, like while he was like hungry. I was like, just something to occupy yourself. And he all of a sudden forgot that he was hungry. He's like, oh, I have something to do. Yeah, so he's obviously very supportive. He's been very supportive with like trying the recipes, but he's not going to go much further beyond that. And I do have to say, like, part of it is my fault because I'm, like I said before, this goes back to what I said before about being really controlling in the kitchen and, having to have everything be cleaned at all times. Like, when he would try and do dishes for me, I'd be like, not good enough. I got to do it over. So he's like, I'm just going to let you do it. So I sort of set myself up for that. Like, I don't really let him help me. But after this past year, when I've been in the kitchen so much, I'm like, can I take that back? Can you just help me with some dishes? So,
what's on your dream dinner party with friends menu when you can finally have one again?
Ooh, I really love this green chili chicken enchilada pot pie that we developed. I like it because I like a meal that comes together as a whole thing. Like, I love a casserole. The pot pie is a perfect kind of example of a sort of a casserole-ish type dish where you can just put it in the oven, you can prepare it before, and then you can enjoy time with your friends. And it looks like you really have stuff under control. Like a dinner party where you just have to put a few things in the oven and the kitchen's clean is always the way to go. Like when I go to someone's house and they're making dinner for us, and if like there's a ton of things happening and they're chopping and like stressing about it, then I get a little stressed. Like I love when things just sort of happen. And it's also why I love Martha Stewart. I'm like, how is everything so easy and perfect for you? Part of that's because she has a production team preparing everything for her, but also like, when you're the production team, you can get it done in like a very easy way as well, if you just plan ahead.
For sure. I would be remiss if I didn't ask you a couple TV related questions because I'm the television editor. So, and I want to make sure that we.
Why did you waited so long?
Well, I also love talking about food, and I'm very excited about the book. It's been fun to cook out of, but I would be remiss if I didn't ask about Modern Family. It's been a little more than a year since the series finale, and I wondered if maybe now that you have a little bit more distance from it, if you could talk about, I don't know, just sort of like what in retrospect you make of having been on one of the most popular sitcoms of its generation, and like whether you had any sense going in that it would be the phenomenon that it turned out to be.
Yeah, I mean, I never, when I got the script initially to audition for Modern Family, and even when I got the job and got to shoot the pilot, like, I don't think that I ever imagined that I would be doing that for 11 years. As an actor, you just don't ever have job security. You're constantly on the brink of unemployment, which is just the reality of being an actor. And I had an 11-year job, which is just unheard of and such an honor. It's been interesting because this past year, the finale of Modern Family aired last April. So we were all, about a month and a half or a month into, lockdown, and we were all just at home. And it was a strange thing to experience that while we were all experiencing like this collective thing together, this, pandemic. And I wasn't able to, be with my cast. And it was like, there was a bit of closure that I didn't get to have when the finale ended. I'm just so grateful that we got to finish the show before everything locked down. Normally we shoot 24 episodes a season. And when we did that 11th season, the writers were like, we're really tired. We can give you 18 good ones. And that's what they did. And if we had done more than 18, I don't think we would have finished. So, that was the universe looking down on us and like blessing us with a really fantastic last season. But, it's one of those shows, I feel like a lot of people in the pandemic then have discovered the show and started watching it for the first time. I know I'm watching shows that have been around for forever that I was like, I'm going to watch The Americans. And I watched The Americans in like 2 months and I binged it and I loved it. And I'm obsessed with it now. It's like, I cannot believe that series passed me by. And I feel like a lot of people are discovering Modern Family for the first time. So I'm getting this wave of love and support from people who are discovering it now. And what I hope and dream for the show is that it continues to live like that for people. And there are new generations that begin to watch it. I just, speaking of The Americans, which is a very heavy show, Justin and I would sometimes have a hard time falling asleep after watching it. So I was like, we need a palate cleanser. And so I was like, have you ever watched The Golden Girls? And he's like, I haven't. I was like, okay, so we started watching The Golden Girls together. And watching Justin discover this show that's been around forever, that he never dreamed of watching, is just really wonderful to like see him enjoy it as much as I do. And so I hope that Modern Family will be that for generations to come.
Well, thank you to our audience. We will now be spending the rest of this chat discussing The Americans because I am also obsessed with that show.
So good.
It's man, really just incredible, gripping television, and the finale is like one of the all-timers in my opinion. I could talk about that all day.
Speaking of other great finales, Justin's actually in the other room right now on the last season of 6 Feet Under.
We actually recently had a conversation in the TV team Slack channel at the Times, and the most cited best finale of all time was the 6 Feet Under finale.
I
For
might
sure.
have to say that's my favorite one as well. Yeah. So I told him, I was like, you can watch this without me, but when you get to the finale, you have to let me watch it with you.
Right, you have to call me in the living room. It's funny that you say that about people catching up with Modern Family, because I feel like one of the things that I've noticed, not just in the pandemic, but in general, is occasionally a show that hasn't been on streaming for a while will land on a streaming service, and suddenly everyone will be talking about it. I mean, the most recent example was see everyone tweeting about The Nanny, which just debuted on, I think, HBO Max, and it hasn't really been on streaming widely available for a while. And now there's, people who weren't even born when that show originally aired are now old enough to like really enjoy, the kind of like classic 90s sitcom vibe of it.
Absolutely, yeah.
Was
there a question in there? I didn't know.
No, I just was mentioning it because I was thinking about it. I actually wanted to ask specifically about, so, you and Eric Stonestreet played Mitchell and Cameron, and they were really sort of the first long-term queer couple in a committed relationship on broadcast TV. And I'm wondering, what your kind of thoughts were when you first learned about and read for the role, given where we were in the culture then. I mean, we were still 6 years away from gay marriage becoming the law of the land. Right. And then also, how you feel like queer representation on TV has changed in that, time since 2009.
Right. I when I auditioned for Modern Family, they wanted me to audition for the role of Cameron, and I did not feel like that was a fit for me. And so I loved the role of Mitchell. I love that I played a lot of parts like Cameron. I come from the theater world, and like I feel like I'd done that type of role before. Obviously, Eric Stonestreet brought something totally different than I would have done to it with his performance. But I really wanted to play the role of Mitchell. Also, I was thinking fiscally, and I was like, okay, Mitchell's part of the core family. He's Jay's son. He's Claire's brother. Like, they could divorce if they didn't like me. If they didn't like the actor who played Cameron, they could be like, oh, and then they got divorced, and then he's off the show. So it's like, if I am Mitchell, like I'm unfireable, basically. I was also thinking that way. But when I read both of those roles, and specifically Mitchell, I felt like this is such an opportunity to bring representation to television of a couple that's in a committed relationship, deep into their relationship. They've been together for a very long time. You crash cut with them immediately to like them bringing home a baby from Vietnam, like they're new parents. I was like, it's exciting, and they're written as real people, and yes, they're gay, and yes, they're funny, and yes, they can be flamboyant at times, but they're grounded, and they are part of this larger family that also accepts them, which is really exciting. And it felt very fresh and very new. And I was also at that point, there were certain states where it was legal to get married, but there were very few of them. And shortly after, I was cast in Modern Family, Barack Obama was elected. Well, no, before this, Barack Obama was elected, president of the United States, and also Proposition 8 passed in California, taking away the rights of same-sex married couples in California. So it was like we had this amazing moment, but also this horrible thing happened to us at the same time. And so I just feel like being able to be a part of a pop culture touchstone about what it means to be a gay couple in that point of time in America was something that it was a privilege. And I took it very, very seriously. And I was honored to be, half of that couple. And, I never for a moment forgot that there were shows that came before us that held the door open for us. Shows like, Will and Grace being probably the most recent one and closest one to us. But what I'm so excited about is all the shows that are coming out now, from everything like, It's Ascend to, Orange is the New Black, where, there's so much more representation on television. And I feel like we took part in holding the door open for a lot of other shows. And it's just about always holding the door open for the people who want to come in next. And there's always room to find more representation and to tell more stories and to dive deeper into what it means to be an LGBTQ member of society. And it's very exciting to see what's happening on television now. And also I cheer on and I champion people who want to take it even further. So to be a part of that legacy of, being a gay character on television is a huge privilege.
I mean, I think it will be, you think about when there are docuseries made about sort of the history of LGBTQ people and pop culture, Modern Family and Mitchell and Cameron are going to be part of that,
there's a
series, which is really...
I've had a few people send me photos of, there's textbooks, that you have in school and, social economics textbooks and social studies textbooks. And when they're talking about members of the LGBTQ community, there's photos of Eric and I as like a recognizable gay couple in this like textbook, which is just really cool that people are, I'm part of the tapestry of what it means to be gay in America. And that's really exciting for me because I'm very proudly and openly, myself in my real life. And so the fact that who I am and the character I played on television can give hope and aspiration to a kid, in Minnesota or Tennessee or New Mexico or Alabama is just a very, very, very profound thing.
In retrospect, did playing a new dad on TV help prepare you at all to be a new dad in real life?
Here are the ways it helped me. I took some of the baby clothes from the Modern Family set, some of the clothes that belonged to my daughter or to Sophia's son on the show, Joe. I took a thing called a snoo, which is a vibrating bassinet that was given to me by the props department. And it's like every mother and dad I talked to was like, you need to get a snoo. I was like, I have access to one. Beyond that, not a lot of help, because when you have a baby on television and the baby poops its diaper or the baby's crying or the baby's hungry, a nurse swoops in and takes the baby from you and you don't have to deal with it. And you can just go get a cup of coffee. So, it gives you a false sense of ease with having a kid. I know I've always been great with kids. I babysat before when I was a struggling actor in New York. That was my side job. I've always been very comfortable with kids. And when we were working with the babies on Modern Family, I was always a bit more comfortable than Eric was when they started to cry. Like, it wouldn't stress me out quite so much. Eric had to leave the room, and I was like, it's okay. And I, would sing to them, and I felt like I was a little bit more patient than he was. I think even he would admit that. So I think, I always knew that I would be good, and certainly the crew would look at me with the kids and be like, you're going to be a great dad someday. So I guess morale and comfort and having that sort of practice run with being around a baby, every day was somewhat helpful, I guess. I don't know.
It makes sense that the snoo was the most helpful. It sounds like it would be comforting.
Yeah.
I have one last TV question before we toss it to some audience questions. Did you happen to see WandaVision?
I did.
I have to ask you about the Modern Family inspired episode and what you thought of it, because I think Elizabeth Olsen's Julie Bowen impression is off the charts good. And what did you think of it?
I've been doing my Julie Bowen impression for the past 11 years, and she was so much better doing it. She was amazing. Miss Olsen deserves an Emmy for it. I thought it was great. It was such an honor also to be part of that. They took iconic shows from different eras and beautifully sort of did send-ups of them. So the fact that Modern Family was even considered to be part of that, storytelling was just such an honor. I loved it. I thought it was really well done. I'm also a huge Catherine Hahn fan. So anytime she's on television, I'm like, yep, I'm going to watch that. I'm going to watch it.
Agreed. Speaking of Modern Family, Annie has our first audience question, and she asks, "Did you ever cook for your Modern Family?
I have cooked for them. Never the whole group at the same time, but I've had small dinner parties. I also would bring a lot of baked goods. Sophia, I think she still has this happen, but like she would basically get a cake delivered to her house once a week, and she would eat about 3 slices of it and then bring the rest into the Modern Family makeup and hair trailer. And so it started turning into this like baked goods section. I would bring things to add to that, and then Eric's girlfriend Lindsay would make these amazing Rice Krispie bars every other week, and she would bring this like it was basically like a bake sale, like the old school bake sales in the hair and makeup trailer. So yeah, I've cooked for them, and I hope to cook some more for them in the future.
Christine asks, "What is your favorite thing to cook and why? Is there a special memory associated with this recipe?"
Oh gosh, my favorite thing to cook. I like to keep it fresh, so like it's hard to say a favorite thing, but I do love doing a Thanksgiving dinner. Like I just like the how much planning you have to do. I like that it's once a year, first of all. But I also just like the ambition of it. Um, I like grinding the turkey. I like figuring out the sides. I like setting the table. I like sort of the whole like the whole structure around what Thanksgiving dinner is. The tradition of it all. I was lucky enough to cook with Martha Stewart on our show, and we actually did a Thanksgiving turkey. And so I always use her recipe. So like I feel that Thanksgiving for me and sort of that dinner. And I'm not even a huge turkey fan. It's just like it's all about the what's the word I'm looking for? The tradition of Thanksgiving dinner. That I really love.
Do you
Also,
have any sort of
I do stovetop stuffing too. I was like I've never made a stuffing that I like more than stovetop. So like that's one thing off my plate.
Do you have any sort of like family specialty sides that are kind of like semi unique to your family? Like I know that in my household, it's like things like creamed onions and like mashed turnips, which I've never seen anyone else serve at Thanksgiving, are like they have to be on the menu. Is there anything like that you all have?
I feel like for me, it would probably be. I mean, during the holidays, my mom would always make these green chili cream cheese roll-ups, and we have a version of them in the cookbook. We actually, it's a perfect example of a hybrid of Julie's history and my history. But we do pimento cheese green chili roll-ups. But that's what we would have them every holiday. They were like the appetizer that my mom would make, and they're very simple. It's just cheese and green chili and like spices, and you spread it on a tortilla and roll it up and slice it in their little finger foods, canapes if you want to be fancy. So I feel like that's something that reminds me of my mom and in the holidays, and I'm sure other people have had them, but it feels very unique to our family.
Sounds delicious. Jill asks, "What is one of the best meals you have experienced at a friend's home?"
One of the best meals I've experienced at a friend's home. Well, I, oh gosh, I have the very fortunate. I'm very fortunate to be in friends with a lot of fantastic cooks and chefs. I'm close with Padma Lakshmi. I remember a dinner party that she threw for us. And it was, a lot of Indian inspired dishes, and it was just a great company. She sort of used it as an opportunity to introduce strangers to one another in her circle. And it was obviously very good food, but she creates a really fun environment. She's a great hostess. She just is a very fun person to be around. There might have been some marijuana involved. So yeah, I think that's one that sticks out.
That sounds like fun. Janine asks, "What dish have you not mastered yet?"
Oh gosh. Yeah, I still feel like I need to really figure out fried chicken. We have a fried chicken recipe in our cookbook. It's something that Julie put in there. I've made it with her before, and when she's with me, I'm good. I'm good to go. But I don't know what it is. I feel like it's. We were talking about this earlier. I just feel like I have fear around it, and I work myself up, and I don't breathe. I freak out. I worry that I'm doing something wrong. I I never have been able to master it on my own, and I've only tried a few times without Julie, so I need to go back to it and like really figure it out because I see her do it and it's easy. I don't know what my problem is. It's truly all in my head.
I think a dish like fried chicken, maybe you agree with this, and maybe there's another kind of example that you have in your life. It comes with it's so important to so many people. It's kind of like, I think of it like barbecue too. It is such a rich tradition that to do it off the cuff almost feels like I don't want to mess with someone else's like really valuable, rich tradition by doing my like ham-handed home version of it.
Which is why I love that, Julie has a version in it that means a lot to her. And she's tweaked it to like be very special to this book. And it feels like it's the recipe I want to like really nail. And I got to be just brave and try it again.
We talked about this a little bit earlier, but Lorena asks what tips you can give us for the substitution of ingredients.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, the internet, Google. I mean, it's so great. If I run out of something, if I run out of spice, if you just Google like what's a good substitution, there's usually 3 or 4 ideas for you. So I sort of, when you're in a recipe and you're looking at these ingredients, you feel like, okay, I got to have all of them. They have to be measured out exactly. But if you sort of step back and you look at the whole recipe, you can sometimes like gauge if it's like a teaspoon of paprika and I don't have paprika, I'm like, it's fine. The dish is still going to be delicious. Not having a teaspoon of paprika is not going to be the end of this dish. Obviously, it's there for a reason, but it's not going to like make this unedible. So I think just backing away from the fear of having to follow everything exactly as it's written is a piece of advice I could pass on.
I mean, I can say, having cooked out of my copy, I substitute like mad, and I didn't feel like there was anything that I made where an ingredient here or there made a huge difference. And so yeah, I think
if you're making like an arugula salad and you don't have arugula,
right?
Find a different salad. But like, if it's, there's absolutely substitutions to be made.
Right. And finally, Nassim asks if you've wondered at all what things will be like if your baby is a picky eater or doesn't like your food. Is that like a fear of yours?
Oh, Nassim, yes. I don't know what I'll do. I have great faith in Beckett. I'm giving him baby food that I found. There's a few great companies. One of them's Little Spoon, another one's called Yummy, and they are really good about making baby food with really interesting flavors. It's like Japanese sweet potato, or like plantains with cinnamon. Like, it's just very, very interesting. And Beckett is really into everything I've given him. And even if he doesn't like something immediately, like, he usually warms up to it. So I'm hoping that will continue. I mean, if he's a baby that just wants macaroni and cheese at all time, I'm going to have a little bit of a hard time, but I also am not in the business of forcing my kid to eat things that they don't want to eat. My dad would always sit me at the table with like a timer to be like, you got to finish your peas and you got to do it in 15 minutes. And like, it was torture. Like, I don't want food to be torture for Beckett. I think it should be a joyful thing. And I think, yes, you need to eat for nourishment and to live, but I don't want eating to be something that feels like work or feels like something that they dread. So I'm going to be as careful as I can about being pushy, but at the same time, As of now, we're doing good. I'm just going to say that. I have positive thoughts.
That's great. We are right at time. Jesse Tyler Ferguson, it's been a real pleasure talking to you. Thank you so much for joining us. And thank you to all of our viewers for checking out today's panel. Don't forget to go to Page's Bookstore, where there are a limited number of signed copies of Food Between Friends. And we hope to see you again soon.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye, Jesse. Have a good one.
Take care. Bye.